Hi, good morning. Thank you for waiting. I am going to log in here now on the Meetup page. I completely messed up the times this morning, and I thought it was a 9:45. And thank you, Rosie, for emailing me, texting me. Now, I, for some reason, should be seeing the YouTube chat on the file on the system I'm using, but I can't seem to find it, so let me just open Scene, Tools, Docs, Chat. Ah, cool. Good morning, good morning. Okay, cool. So I've got the chat window here. I can see any messages, hopefully. I don't know how many of you are actually online, but that's okay. I will just carry on. And I'm opening the events chat. Okay, cool. So if anyone wants to send me an email, a message on the Meetup chat, that's possible as well, but on YouTube is better. Okay, what's going on? Okay, so we will begin. Calming an anxious brain. There you go. Okay. And we'll be looking at evidence-based approaches to anxiety. And we'll start, I will cover different schools of thought and different theories, and hopefully it will all make sense, and if not, then just let me know. And on the chat, and then there will be optionals as well. So, for example, it's difficult to talk about anxiety without talking about attachment styles, but it is up to you guys if you want me to go into more detail, and I'll give you that option as we proceed. So let me start. I'll start with Carl Rogers. My face is on the way, so I am going to remove my face from the picture. And we'll start with Carl Rogers, and because his theory of the self, it's from the 1950s. It's kick-started a sort of movement in Western psychology that wasn't there before. And I have come to realize that his theory is largely aligned with yogic, Vedic knowledge and philosophy, but his theory of person-centered therapy or client-centered therapy kick-started a more compassionate movement in the Western psychology field, and that was very welcome because up to that point, psychoanalysis and also cognitive behavioral therapy, they were not, they are a little bit different, and you will see anyway. So I'll cover Carl Rogers, I'll introduce him and talk about this theory of the self. I'll briefly talk about mindfulness and do a little mindfulness exercise, which is really, really simple. But it's just to give an idea of what is the mechanism behind it. And it's really easy to just get that in with an exercise. Cognitive diffusion comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it is another very effective way of address anxious thought. And then internal family systems is relatively new, started in the 80s, and in a way combines all the previous theories and does something interesting to it, and it is very effective as well. And then I'll just quickly cover the yogic tradition, and later we can decide what you want to go more into. And we'll begin by Carl Rogers and the organismic self. So in the 1950s, Carl Rogers came up with this idea that we have a true self, which is what he calls the organismic self. And he says that psychological discomfort stems from an incongruence between self-concept, which is whom I think I am. I see there is a little... There you go. So your self-concept, our self-concept, is the person we think we are, and the values we hold, and our preferences, our tastes, generally our personality, I guess, whatever it is available to consciousness. And why is that different? Well, because not everything that we are is available to consciousness. And this would be part of the true self. Maybe some desires, some wishes, some dreams, some aspirations, things like that. They might get pushed out of consciousness for one reason or another, because maybe they are out of context. For example, if a part of your personality doesn't fit in your surroundings, with your family, with your traditions, with your peers, for whatever reason, then maybe you might have to push that personality trait out of your system and into some, what we call the shadow. Jungians will call it the shadow, and there are other names for that, but we can go into that later, and optionally. But for now, we've got the ideal self, which is whom we think we should be, whom we aim to be. So, for example, I aim to be a morning person, but the reality is that I can't wake up early, so I just can't be fighting with my personality, and if I do, that will cause a lot of discomfort. It will go on to self-criticism. If I am expecting from myself to be someone that I just cannot be, because it doesn't match other aspects of my personality, or many reasons that could be, then that will cause a lot of discomfort. I will be self-criticizing a lot and disappointed with myself a lot. So Carl Rogers reckons that the ideal self, and which is whom we think we should be, and the person we really are, and the person we think we are three different entities, and if they're not congruent, if they're very different from each other, or if they're far apart from each other, that causes a lot of discomfort. And he says if those characteristics are more aligned and can work with harmony, which of course involves a lot of self-acceptance of things that we can't control, then it will feel better. And this is the aim of therapy for most therapeutic approaches. So Jungians call it the individuation process. So it's you coming into yourself, into your real self, and negotiating that position of who you are, and still adapt to society and adapt to your surroundings. And there are many ways to do that, and we can cover this into more detail if you decide that you want me to. So I'll ask in the chat in a moment where you want to go more into. So I will then have the next slide. Yes. And then my face does not fit, so I'm gonna hide my face. Okay. So Carl Rogers' organismic self. There are some qualities because the question is, how do I know that myself is the organismic self? And how do I know the difference between the organismic self and the real self? Or the self-concept rather. So he identified that the organismic self has a few qualities. It's open to experience. So it accepts positive and negative emotions. And negative feelings are not denied. They're worked through. They're treated as information. So we tend to feel anxious about feeling anxious, or angry with the thought of feeling stressed, or anxious about feeling stressed or sad. And that results in avoidance of situations, avoidance of features and aspects of our lives, sometimes completely deny ourselves from an entire aspect of our personality because we are afraid to fail, or we are afraid to what we might feel if we do it. And that fear is not from the organismic self. So when I am afraid of being who I am, for whatever reason, when I'm afraid of feeling stressed or anxious, that is because we are trying to fit in. We're trying to do something that we are maybe it's incongruent with our values, or incongruent with something natural that comes from what we call the gut feeling. So the organismic self, decisions that come from the organismic self, they will not deny any emotion. You will go like, I will try and gain this extra qualification, and I am going to study at night after hours, and it's going to cause me a lot of discomfort. I'm gonna not have so much spare time. I'm going to have to meet new people. I'm probably going to fail at some exams or another, and I will feel incompetent, but I am going to do it anyway, because even if it hurts, even if it's uncomfortable, I'm going to do it. So that determination of trying to do something, attempting to go through a process despite how it might feel, that's a very strong decision, and that normally you can only bear that. You can only bear so much pain if you are connected to your organismic self. So That's what happens in Carl Rogers' view. The organismic self is also present focused, so you won't be thinking about the past or the future. The organismic self is more contemplative of whatever it is that we have right now. So the weather today, the food, the comfort, the company, being your own company or someone else's company, doing something that you like. So the organismic self will always be present oriented. You'll always be thinking of what does it feel good right now. And when we are future oriented, for example, and we think, oh yes, in 5 years time I want to have this degree, or I want to have this and that, that is probably the ideal self. Trust feelings and the organismic self, when you're in touch with it and when you are in it, feelings can be trusted, but we wouldn't be ruled by them. And I'll go more into this because this is quite a sensitive topic. It's very ambiguous because our feelings sometimes tell us that something is wrong when it's not. And sometimes it tells us nothing when you probably should feel something. So we live in a body that is wired for survival, a brain that's wired for survival, and not for happiness. So we get a lot of hormonal discharges like cortisol from situations that perhaps used to be dangerous a long time ago but are not dangerous anymore. So our body, our nervous system play tricks on us. So the organismic self would acknowledge feelings and accept it and trust that they are there for a reason, but not take everything as true, because the organismic self is not so much of a decision maker. But anyway, let's move on for now and go back to this. Creativity comes from the organismic self. It's because the organismic self is more open. So creative thinking and risk-taking and living more on a what-if and living in a world of possibilities rather than limitations, that comes from the organismic self, because the organismic self is that part of you that wants to grow, wants to experience the world, wants to be part and feels connected to everything. So there is an element of risk-taking to that, opening up to a person, for example, is a very dangerous thing, because we are opening up ourselves to be potentially disappointed, but we do it anyway because the experience is worth the risk and worth the while. Courage is another aspect from the organismic self. It's always looking for new challenges and new experiences. So any other aspect of ourselves which is brought up by aiming to be someone or believing that we are someone that we are not will cause conflict with the organismic self, and it will feel wrong. It will cause a lot of anxiety. So we can do a little exercise later as well. So I have gradually come to one negative conclusion about the good life. It seems to me that the good life is not any fixed state. It is not, in my estimation, a state of virtue, or contentment, or nirvana, or happiness. It is not a condition in which the individual is adjusted or fulfilled or actualized. To use psychological terms, it is not a state of drive reduction or tension reduction or homeostasis. So, after about 16 years after he wrote Client-Centered Therapy, he made this admission. And he really doesn't think that there is such a thing as being happy. And that also starts a movement. So there's a book called The Happiness Paradox. So we are wired for survival and not happiness. And also we want to leave a mark in the world. And that involves a lot of discomfort, and you can be happy and feel satisfied even while you are struggling. So struggle is part of life, is what he's saying, and we might as well relax into it and be part of whatever is happening, that even if we don't really like it, because every moment is an opportunity that will never come back, and there's a part of us that knows that. Mindfulness. Okay, so this is a very simple exercise that I'm going to do, and you can choose to do it with me or you can just watch. But if you do it with me, this will help you feel the power of mindfulness. So, let me just have a sip of a drink because my mouth is really dry. I haven't been so well this week, and I think it is maybe hay fever, so I feel a bit bunged up. Apologies for my voice and my stuffy face. So, sorry, just a second. I'm gonna have to cough. Okay, here we go. So, relax in your chair or on the sofa or wherever you may be sitting. And just for a moment, close your eyes and notice 5 things that you can feel. So 5 things you can feel. It might be the chair that you're sitting, the weight of your body on the seat. It might be your clothes on your skin. It might be the cold air or hot air. But just notice 5 things you can feel. Okay, so you can, whether you got 5 or more or less right now, doesn't matter. We'll move on to 5 things you can hear. So 5 things you can hear. Of course, 1 is my voice. You notice you may start searching for the tiniest noises. It might be a car passing outside or a bird chirping. Now, I would like you to open your eyes and notice 5 things you can see. So 5 things you can see. And I'm gonna come onto the screen as well. 5 things you can see. Okay, so you might have found those 5 things by now. You might have found 4, 3, or more or less. Doesn't really matter. I just want you to notice how much calmer it feels to be noticing those things, and how calming it feels. And it does that because it brings your attention onto the present, and the present moment is always safe. It's the tiniest moments, the moments in between the moments, it's safe. What causes us to feel fear is thinking of the future, and sad is thinking of the past. So mindfulness is bringing our attention to the present and onto whatever it is that we're doing. So we come into a state of flow, and we feel more connected with the activity that we are performing. So cognitive diffusion is the next approach to soothe anxiety. And it comes from mindfulness, and it's just slightly different in the sense that we separate ourselves from our thoughts and feelings as well. But this is cognitive diffusion, not emotional diffusion, so we keep it to thoughts only. So you see your thoughts as what they are, just thoughts, not what they say they are. So we don't assume automatically that a thought is true. That just because we thought a thought that it is true, that thoughts, they need to be challenged. Every idea we have, the story that we create to describe our life story, this sometimes needs challenging, because if it isn't working for you, then it may be a matter of revisiting decisions, revisiting the narrative, and that might help reducing discomfort. So method, expand attention to thinking and experiencing as an ongoing behavioral process. Okay, this means when I have a thought, I think, oh yes, I'm having that thought now. Yeah, this is when I think that this always happens to me, for example. No, look, this is the moment, this is the sort of situation where I think I shouldn't have bought a car anyway. So let's say you get, I don't know, a fine, and you then get the fine, and you start thinking, I shouldn't have bought this car anyway. Why do I always make bad decisions? Why can't I pay more attention? And so on and so forth. And we start giving ourselves a bit of a scolding internally about an error or a situation, and we make it pervasive, permanent and persistent just by connecting with other times. Oh, remember that time I got a fine and I should have learned from that, as an example. So quickly we create an isolated, we get an isolated event, which is making a mistake, getting a fine, and we turn it into a whole narrative. And we connect to many other events that happened in the past and aspects of our personality. And suddenly it just becomes so much more than that. And the truth is that it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. We decide every moment how we interpret the things that happen around us and with us. So in this case, I would then isolate the thought as think, oh, yes, this is the moment when I think that I am clumsy, or that I always make mistakes, or that I'm careless. And I know I'm having that thought, but I'm not going to believe it straight away. I'm just going to watch this thought. I'm just going to watch it play out. I know it's going to do next. It's going to say that I shouldn't have got the car. That's the next thought on the chain. Yeah, I see it. So you separate from your thoughts and you start looking at yourself as something that exists but isn't every thought that you have. So you own your thoughts. I'm having the thought, but I am not the thought, and the thought is not me. The thought is just a cognitive process that happens as a result of many operations, but it isn't me. It is just a thought. When to use? When private events are functioning as barriers due to fear, fusion, evaluation, avoidance, reasons. Yeah, okay. Fusion is because I think that I'm incompetent. So I'm believing the thought. I'm having the thought that I'm incompetent, and then I believe my thought. And just because I thought I'm incompetent, it is the truth. So that's me fusing with the thought. Evaluation, well, I am, kind of useless anyway. I've always been. Therefore, I am not going to drive my car anymore, ever again. Avoidance, avoiding driving the car so I don't feel useless. And reasons is the rationale behind it. It's better for me not to drive anyway. And even though I love driving, I will give up on that thing that I love doing because I don't want to go through the hassle. Because I also believe my thought that I'm incompetent, I shouldn't drive. So it might happen then from that point on that I will be feeling useless, and then I'm not going to drive, and then not driving makes me feel more useless. So giving up on something that I love because part of me doesn't want me to feel useless when I get a fine, but it's impossible not to get fines. It's possible, but it's very difficult, and I will just live with that, and that is a little disappointment that will have to carry with me for the rest of my life for the sake of avoidance. So, and that is the case when we challenge the thought, am I really useless? What about all the other things that I do that go well? What about the other 300 days in a year that I drive and I don't get a fine? So we start looking at things from the opposite and challenging those thoughts. Just because I had the thought, it doesn't mean I am useless. Internal family systems, my favorite. I really like it because it's really effective. And I am on the way here. Let me see if I can move my head to the top of the screen. There you go. Developed by Richard Schwartz in the 80s, and he learned from his patients, mostly eating disorders. So he trained as a family therapist. And he was dealing a lot with teenagers with eating disorders. And they just told him, it's a part of me that doesn't let me eat. And then he must have had some, he did. I think he said he had transcendental meditation classes. So he kind of knew how to separate from your thoughts and engage in creative thinking or whatever. So he just encouraged their patients to entertain those parts. Okay, well, why is the part not going to let you eat? Well, the part is saying that if I eat, I'll be unlovable, or that the only way for me to be lovable is to be really, really skinny. And that's something you learned from probably something that happened at school, or some sort of bullying, some sort of romantic disappointment, or something happened. That part decides to protect the self, protect the person, say, wow, you were so upset when that boy said that you were not attractive. I'll just make sure that never happens again, so I'm not going to let you eat, so you don't suffer again. And then he realizes that even though what those parts were doing was harmful to the person, because if you don't eat, you die, it's the reason behind the part was doing it was good. And that's why his book is called No Bad Parts, because he realized that whatever we do, there's always a positive intent. But positive intent is not new, and Carl Rogers came up with that word, that definition. So Carl Rogers also say we always have positive intent, even if it is ultimately harmful. And although of course you don't want to encourage the behavior not to eat, but you are more able to negotiate with the part that doesn't let her eat when you connect with it and come from a place of understanding rather than judging and criticizing. So where it goes from that is we ask the part that doesn't let the person eat and say, if we were capable of healing the part of you that feels hurt because it was told that he wasn't attractive, would you let her eat? And the part will say yes. Do you know that eating is leading to an early death? No, the part doesn't know. Our mental parts don't know what life is. Sorry, I seem to be losing my voice. Our part simply don't care about emotions and sensations. It doesn't understand the real world and what the real death is, and our needs of eating or sleeping. It doesn't care about that. They only care about protecting us from feeling psychological pain. So once the part understands that what it's doing is not helpful, it doesn't know a different way of doing it. But if it could be healed, would it change? Yes, of course it would. So we ask the part to give us space and let us work with the part that's hurt. Then the part that's hurt comes through and tells its story and says, well, I'm just a teenager, and then this boy said that I'm unattractive, and that's really hurtful, and reminds me, it reminds me when I was a baby and someone said that someone pushed me away, or something like that, and this part is then carrying this hurt wherever it goes, and whenever there's a comment, is extremely sensitive to comments like that in regards to appearance. So then he just went with his patients on that. His patients were the ones leading, and the parts were saying what they need. So I've asked the part, what do you need to heal? Well, I just have to get this wound and throw it into the water and release it into the river. And okay, go on then. And with your imagination, you release the wound, the psychological wound, into the river and let go, and simply let go of what that person said, and heals. And then what he found is that the person starts eating normally again. And that was the breakthrough, because even though Carl Rogers had come with the organismic self idea, and he came with the positive intent idea, Richard decided to apply this in this way and talk to the parts. And parts work is also not new. And so what Richard did is a combination of all the things we already knew up to that point. But what he didn't know, and he discovered just by listening, is that the parts can heal themselves as well. So, and he can heal those parts, and the parts then stop doing the protective mechanism that they were doing, because they don't need to protect from a part that's hurt if the part is no longer hurt. So it aligns with, for me, it aligns with Vedic teachings as well, which is of the 5 bodies, so cautious, and I will get into that in a moment. And it can be seen as a cognitive diffusion technique, so I am hoping you can see the similarities there. So it's quite a creative way of helping people, helping us, because I do a lot of IFS myself, and it does really feel quite transformative. The 5 bodies, cautious. I'm going into this because I was reading the other day, and I suddenly realized that these guys are all talking about the same thing. And of course the texts are very old, and we have our own interpretation of what they mean. Every translation, every philosopher will interpret those texts slightly different, and all we have is perhaps the names for each, and then the text behind it, but which is not very clear. But what it says is that we have a bliss body, which in my view is the same as the organismic self, and from Carl Rogers, and the self from Jung, and the self from Richard Schwartz. So I think this is what they mean by the self, and this Vedic text is one of the Upanishads. I can't remember which one, but it's easy to find. And it says that this bliss body is the body that is connected with the universe or creation itself. And this, when we get in touch with this body, we feel bliss. But it doesn't happen very often. as we are enveloped within within 4 other bodies. So the outermost body would be the physical body. Annamaya kosha means body made of food. So it's the food body. And it means it's made of earth. As we know, we're made of everything that exists in this earth, plus some stardust. And this is the physical body we inhabit. And the next one is the breath body, the energetic body, which they call pranamaya kosha. Prana is life force or breath. So that is what keeps us alive. So if you notice you're breathing and you notice that you cannot stop breathing, it's because the pranamaya kosha doesn't let us stop breathing. Breathing is one of our bodies, so that's why it would be impossible to stop breathing. And next to underneath it is the manomaya kosha. So the body of emotions is fear, love, anger, all of those emotions that we feel. That's a body of its own according to this theory. And then the intellectual body, Vijnanamaya kosha, which would be very close to the bliss body, just next to it. And the intellectual body, would they call it the mind body or the mind, which are just the thoughts? And I am wondering if that's where the parts live. And yeah, I mean, it does feel like we have this layer. It's almost independent from us, our mind. And it has its own processes. It has processes, learns things and recalls things and makes decisions, and almost independent of us. So that's the theory comes from us being separate from our thoughts and feelings, not being one thing. And adjusting those bodies and harmonizing them, and that would be the aim of yoga in all its forms. And there is a type of yoga called Jnana yoga, which deals with the mind. It's the mind yoga. And I believe this is parts work. I believe this is where we separate our thoughts and learn to have relationships with those parts of us. And that is because it allows us to have more, not control, because I don't like that word, but we become more attuned, and we are not controlled by our mind, and instead we work together. And so I think all of those theories are talking about the same thing in one way or another. And then lastly, I put a slide here about attachment styles. So if you want, we can go into that and we can discuss why this is important, because it's a source of anxiety as well. But it will take us a little bit over time if we do. So I'm going to come back to the start just to show you the list of what I covered. And I would like you to let me know in the chat which one would you like me to go into more detail, or if there is anything else you'd like to discuss, and I'll be happy to. So you can send me any questions if I haven't, even if I haven't covered. I did something to my software now, which I'm not supposed to do. Oh my goodness, I haven't even. What's the link between Carl Rogers and IFS? Yes, so Carl Rogers, when he developed person-centered theory, which it started as client-centered theory, and now it's person-centered theory. He came up with the idea that we have an organismic self, which is a true self, it's a core self, it's a entity of some sort, it's something that is different from our thoughts and our ideations, and it's different from the thought processes that we have, and it's kind of covered by the other selves, the ideal self, and the self-concept, which is the adaptation, our adapted self, maybe you can say that. And that the core self has qualities, so you know that you are aligned, you're acting from that organismic self. When you display a set of qualities, which is courage, openness, wisdom, and so on. And he says that this is a dynamic self, it keeps changing, and that's where the drive or the self-actualization drive comes from. And he had this insight by looking at a sack of potatoes from his father's cellar, and the potatoes were sprouting, and there was a little leaf also trying to seek in the light. So he then understood as the self being always seeking the light, always seeking to growth, seeking to grow and looking for any openings of light so it can shine through. And so that organismic self is a part of you, in a way, which you can trust. And when you're connected with it and you act aligned to it, you feel good. Or later on he said, you don't feel necessarily static and happy all the time. You still struggle, like everyone does, still go through a lot of struggle, but it doesn't feel so bad, because it doesn't feel like such a struggle, because you're doing it from a place of truth, from who you really are. So his theories, of course, diverge, because Carl doesn't really talk about parts, but Carl validates a person in complete acceptance. So the diversion is that Carl Rogers is more concerned ultimately with the danger of loving someone conditionally. So to say to a child, I will only love you if you behave, for example, and then we grow up believing that we need to behave to be loved, and whatever that behaving means is up to whatever the parent imprinted, and then further on in life whatever we imprinted as believing that is good behavior. And then that transactional love, being loved because we provide something in return somehow, that causes us to create a personality that doesn't align with our true personality. And then he is concerned with separating ourselves from this conditional regard and going for more unconditional love, regard, unconditional positive regard, which is the idea that everyone deserves love just for existing. So this is what he focused on, and his therapeutic approach is to allow you to see that you can love yourself and you can love others without any conditions. But Richard Schwartz, IFS, is more concerned, is a method of reducing psychological pain by going onto the parts of us that are carrying wounds and healing them. So is his method. So the methods, the goals of therapy are similar, because what happens is on IFS, when you talk to a protector which is a part of you that's making you do things in order to not feel discomfort, not feel pain, not feel psychological pain. So the part will, for example, not let you leave the house. So, okay, there's a part of me that doesn't let me leave the house, because when I leave the house I get stressed, and I don't want to feel stressed. And of course, IFS will find the part that is carrying that stress and find out from it where it comes from, if it's ready to release, if it's really true, because parts are often still living in the past. They're living at the moment where the trauma happened, and release them from that traumatic event and liberates them into or what they call update. And they can let go of the hurt and forgive and come to the present moment, see that it was just something that happened and is now not happening anymore. And if that part is healed, then the part that doesn't let us leave the house ultimately would allow us to leave the house, because there is nothing to protect from. And what does that mean? That means that the IFS method assumes that we have the organismic self. The IFS doesn't call it organismic self, because it has its own terms, but it is the same. The IFS self is Carl Rogers' organismic self. And for example, in CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, you wouldn't be talking about the self, that or the subconscious or parts. So CBT is more concerned with changing thoughts and behavior. Some people say it's superficial. I don't think it's superficial because it's not meant to be depth. It's just meant to give you relief for the symptoms, and it's pretty good at that in its own way. But it doesn't go into the self theory. But Carl Rogers, person-centered therapy, IFS, and Gestalt, and Jungian therapy, they all operate under the same assumption, which is we have a self which is a source of wisdom, courage, openness to experience, and he wants to experience life, and it's connected to this life, and therefore needs to be nurtured and brought into your life more. Does that make sense? Because it is very complex. It is just it's similar but it's different. But yeah, the link, like you asked, it's the self, the organismic self. Let me know if that makes sense, and yeah, send me more messages. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I will end the screening now, and I am going to, in a couple of hours, add the references of everything I said, and I'll add some links to books and material that you might be interested in if you want to read more. And putting them together like this is my work, yes. So to make those links between those theories, and that would be my approach to anxiety. And yeah, I put them together, but those, of course, I'm not the creator of those theories. I'm just putting them together. And as such, I am going to put all the links from everything I got this material from, and who I'm referring to and everything. And I'm going to add a link to a website where you can find out your attachment style. I'll see if I put a link to some online testing stuff. Yeah. So just bear with me while I compile, and I'll also post the list on the meetup group, so you probably get a notification of that. Okay, so if there's nothing else, then I am going to go and do something about this throat Thank you so much for staying with me. Thank you so much for watching, for supporting, for being with me even though I messed up the time of the start. Apologies. I thought I had scheduled for 9:45, but I was wrong. And so thank you for watching, and I will also I think you might be able to always watch this through the link provided if you want to go back to anything that I've covered. And yeah, thank you very much. Take care, and hopefully see you soon.